Story number one. I've been a cop for a while now, seen stabbings, overdoses, car wrecks, even a couple of homicides. But there's one call that still keeps me up at night. It happened on a quiet Tuesday evening, on Ashmere Drive, a small cul-de-sac where nothing much ever happens. I got dispatched to a domestic assault, possible severe injury, female bleeding heavily. The dispatcher's voice was steady, but I could hear something strained underneath it, something like confusion. When I got there, the front door was open just enough for me to see a smear of red on the handle. I stepped in, and the smell hit me first. Metallic, sharp, unmistakable. Blood. There was a woman lying on the floor just inside the living room, her throat cut almost ear to ear. She was still conscious, gasping wetly, eyes rolling. I pressed my jacket against her neck, radioed for medics, and told her to hold on, even though deep down I knew she probably wouldn't. Her blood was warm and slick, soaking through my sleeves. That's when I heard it, the faint sound of a baby crying upstairs. At first I thought maybe the victim had a child. It made sense. Domestic cases often involve kids. I drew my gun and started up the stairs. The wooden steps creaked under my boots, and that crying got louder, sharper, like the kid was choking or gasping for air between sobs. The walls were streaked with bloody handprints leading up, smeared and uneven, like someone had been dragged or was trying to hold themselves up. The bedroom door at the top was slightly open, a dull light flickering from inside. The smell of blood was stronger there, thick and nauseating. I pushed the door open, ready for anything. The crying stopped immediately. The room was empty. No crib, no baby, just a bed neatly made, and a dresser mirror cracked down the middle. The air felt wrong, dense and heavy, like a storm about to break. I looked around again, flashlight sweeping corners, closet under the bed. Nothing. But then I noticed something weird. The mirror's surface seemed to pulse, faintly, almost like breathing. I backed away, trying to rationalize it. Maybe my flashlight beam was moving. Maybe the blood smell was getting to me. I told myself that. I started heading back down, my radio crackling faintly in my earpiece. But the signal was cutting out, static-filled. When I reached the bottom, the living room was empty. The woman, gone. No blood on the floor, no jacket, no medics, nothing. The room looked clean, too clean, like it had never happened. The coppery smell had vanished, replaced with this cold, musty odor, like a house that hadn't been lived in for years. And every light that had been on when I entered was now off. The place was pitch black, except for my flashlight beam shaking slightly in my hand. I radioed dispatch, but the line was dead. No static, no sound, just silence. My own breathing was the only thing I could hear, ragged and shallow. I thought maybe I'd gone to the wrong address, that I'd somehow hallucinated everything. But when I turned toward the front door to leave, it wasn't there. Just an empty wall. I swept the light around. No door, no windows. Just the living room walls stretching out farther than they should have. It didn't make sense. The layout of the house had changed. That's when I noticed the handprints again. They were back, but this time higher up, like someone had dragged bloody hands across the ceiling. I followed them slowly, every step echoing too loudly. My boots made this sticky sound on the floor, but when I looked down, the hardwood was spotless. The sound kept happening, though, like someone else was walking right beside me, just out of my flashlight's range. Then came a faint creak from upstairs, followed by soft thuds, like small feet running. I wanted to leave, but there was nowhere to go. I aimed my flashlight up the staircase, and for a split second, I saw a figure standing at the top. Small, about the height of a toddler. Head tilted to the side, motionless. I blinked, and it was gone. The crying started again, this time from behind me. I spun around, nothing, but the sound was closer, clearer. I could almost feel breath on my neck, like something was crying right into my ear. The sound shifted then, deepened, turning into a wet gurgle, the kind someone makes when their throat is full of blood. That broke me. I ran to where the door should have been and slammed my shoulder against the wall. The plaster cracked, and suddenly there it was again. The front door, half open, night air spilling in. I stumbled outside, gasping, flashlight trembling in my hand. The street was quiet. The medic's van and backup cars were parked out front. My partner, Daniels, was standing near the cruiser, talking into his radio like nothing was wrong. He looked at me and frowned. Said he'd been calling me for 10 minutes. Said when they arrived, the house was dark and empty. No sign of struggle, no sign of a victim. I tried explaining, but he just stared, eyes narrowing. I looked down at my sleeves, expecting blood, but they were clean. The floor behind me was spotless. They searched the whole house. Nothing. No woman, no baby, no signs of anyone living there at all. The utilities had been shut off months earlier. Records said the owners moved out after a domestic homicide 3 years ago. The woman's name matched the one I thought I'd seen on the victim's ID, but she'd been dead for years. Her husband had cut her throat before hanging himself in the attic. No baby had ever been found. After the investigation was closed, I went back once, a few weeks later. The place had been condemned, boarded up, but through one of the gaps I could see faint streaks of red on the inside of the wall, like handprints reaching down. Sometimes I still hear that crying. It doesn't happen often, just now and then, usually when I'm alone in my car, late at night after a call. The baby's sobbing starts faintly, somewhere in the back seat, rising until it sounds like it's right next to my ear. Then it stops as suddenly as it starts. I've told myself it's stress, lack of sleep, leftover adrenaline. Cops see things that mess with their heads all the time. That's what I keep telling myself. But sometimes when I wash my hands after a shift, I swear I smell that same metallic scent again. Faint but sharp. And I can't shake the feeling that no matter how much I scrub, it's still there, under the skin. I've stopped taking calls on Ashmere Drive. I don't know what's in that house, or if it's something my brain just made up to cope with what I saw. But I know one thing for sure. There are nights when I dream I'm back inside, walking past those bloody handprints again, and somewhere upstairs, something small is still crying, waiting for someone to find it. I always wake up before I get to the room, and every single time the air around me smells like blood. Story number 2. This one isn't my story, but it was told to me by an EMT friend I trust completely. He's the kind of guy who laughs at horror movies and doesn't flinch at accident scenes. But when he told me about the lady in 4B, he couldn't look me in the eyes. He said it changed the way he thinks about the living dead. It started with a smell. Residents of an old apartment complex in a nearby city began complaining that the hallway near the lower units reeked of something foul, like meat left in the sun or a dead raccoon in the vents. The apartment manager checked around, thinking it was probably a busted trash bag or something stuck in the garbage chute. But when he reached Unit 4B, the air grew thick. He said it wasn't just a bad smell. It felt wet, heavy, like it clung to his skin. He knocked. No answer. He tried again. The smell seemed to pulse from inside the door. So he called the cops and first responders. That's where my friend came in. He said when they opened the door, the smell almost knocked them backward. The air inside was a humid, sweet, sour rot. The curtains were drawn. The apartment was dim, cluttered with half-eaten food containers, used tissues, and a weird number of candles melted into puddles. The kind of mess that made it clear no one had cleaned for weeks. In the middle of the living room sat a woman. She was alive, just sitting there, stiff as stone, eyes half open and staring at nothing. Her skin had that waxy look that reminded him of funeral homes. Pale, stretched too tight. Her hair was matted to her head. She didn't react when they entered, just blinked slowly like she hadn't slept in days. He said something felt wrong before they even touched her. There were flies, not just buzzing around the trash. They were swarming near her, landing on her legs, crawling in and out of her clothes. When one of them lifted her blanket, something squirmed underneath. They called for the medic kit, thinking maybe bed sores or infection. But when they pulled down her undergarments, it all went to hell. Maggots, hundreds of them. They fell to the floor in a pale, writhing mass, dropping from her thighs, her waist, and somewhere deeper. My friend said the sound of them hitting the floor was like rice pouring from a sack. The smell was indescribable, like raw meat and something chemical. She wasn't dead. She was conscious, breathing, her eyes fluttering in pain or confusion. Her body, from the waist down, was in a state of decay, literally rotting while she was still alive. Later, the hospital found she'd been injecting herself with some kind of homemade cleansing solution and poking acupuncture needles down there to release toxins. Some of the wounds got infected, tissue started dying, and flies must have laid eggs in the necrotic flesh. That's the medical part. That's what could be explained. But it didn't end there. When they lifted her to move her onto the stretcher, my friend said he heard something. It wasn't her voice. It came from beneath her. A faint, wet whisper, like someone breathing through mud. It sounded like words. Not clear ones, but syllables trying to form something. He said it came from the open wound areas, like her body was exhaling its own voice. They thought it was the air escaping, or muscle spasms. But then it repeated, same rhythm, same murmur, like chanting. He didn't say anything, just tried to focus on his job. But on the drive to the hospital, things got worse. She started humming, not loudly, just a soft, tuneless hum that vibrated through the ambulance. The monitor showed her pulse weak but steady. Then the heart rate spiked, and all at once the interior lights flickered. The hum turned into a gurgle. Then the voice again, that muffled, breathy whisper. He thought maybe she was trying to speak. He leaned close to her face. Her breath reeked of infection and metal. But her lips weren't moving. The sound wasn't coming from her throat. It was coming from lower. He swore the maggots under her skin shifted in patterns. Not random crawling, but like they were forming shapes. The smell intensified, and for a split second, he thought he saw something move under the blanket. Not her legs, but something else pushing up from inside her flesh, like hands pressing from beneath thin ice. When they got her into the ER, she flatlined before they could even transfer her. Nurses rushed to resuscitate, but no one wanted to touch her without gloves up to their elbows. And then the power flickered again. It wasn't a blackout, just a single blink of darkness. When the lights came back, she was gone. Not figuratively, gone. The sheet they'd covered her with was still there, soaked and heavy, but her body wasn't. Security footage later showed no one entered or left that room for those few seconds. There was just static across the cameras during that exact window of time. They searched the hospital, every hallway, every stairwell, thinking maybe she'd somehow stumbled away in confusion. But there was no trace, not even footprints. The next day, the EMT van started smelling again. Same rotten sweetness. They checked everywhere. Under the seats, the gurney compartment, the med drawers. Nothing. Still, the smell lingered for weeks. Then the driver found maggots in the glove box. No entry point, no food source. Just a handful of squirming larvae in the corner, like they'd appeared there. After that, my friend refused to drive that van. He said even when it was cleaned and disinfected, he could still smell her. That same damp rot, faint but always there. Sometimes when he parked alone at night, he swore he could hear faint humming coming from the back compartment. A few months later, he transferred stations. Said he couldn't handle another call in that building. The apartment where it happened, still vacant. The property manager tried to clean and rent it out. But every time someone moved in, they complained of strange issues. Flies in the vents, the sound of water dripping even when the taps were off, the faint smell of perfume mixed with decay. One tenant claimed to have woken up with bite marks along her inner thighs, like something small had been feeding there. Eventually, they sealed the unit. When I heard all this, I tried to reason it out. The power outages could have been coincidence. The maggots, contamination, the body going missing, maybe some hospital screw-up or stolen cadaver. There's always an explanation, right? But then, a few weeks after he told me, I noticed something. The night he shared the story, I'd been sitting in my car while we talked. When I got in the next morning, there was this faint, rotten sweet smell in the air. I assumed it was from the nearby dumpster. But it's been 3 days. I've cleaned the car twice, sprayed air freshener, vacuumed every corner. And every now and then, when I'm driving alone and the AC kicks in, I swear I can hear a faint humming coming from the vents. Just like he said. And now I can't tell if the smell's fading or if I'm just getting used to it. Story number 3. I was working security dispatch at a tribal casino during the early pandemic shutdown in 2020. The casino had been closed for months, but security still had to be on duty. Normally, the place was alive. Slot machines clinking, Muffled laughter, music from the overhead speakers. Now it was silent, just the low hum of the HVAC and the occasional buzz from the old monitors in front of me. My shift was the graveyard one, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. It was just me in the dispatch office, surrounded by screens showing empty gaming floors, dimly lit hallways, and the darkened hotel lobby. There were maybe 5 of us on the entire property. 2 rovers, a supervisor, an engineer, and me in the chair with the radio. I knew exactly where everyone was at any moment. That's why what started happening never made sense. It began one night when I noticed a flicker on one of the monitors. Camera 14, 4th floor hotel hallway. The lights were fluttering, almost rhythmic. A quick pulse, then stillness. As I watched, something seemed to distort the image, like heat waves off asphalt. A shape. It was subtle at first, a suggestion of movement more than anything. Then it became clear that the distortion had form, a humanoid outline, bending the air around it. It moved slowly toward the camera from the far end of the hallway. The lights dimmed more the closer it got. Then right as it reached under the camera, the feed glitched. Static, then black. When it came back, the hallway was normal again. Empty. Still. The lights steady. I radioed the rover to check the area, just in case. He found nothing. Said it was quiet, no flickering lights, no one around. Maybe a glitch, I told myself. The cameras were old. A few nights later, it happened again. Not the shape, but something else. One of the hotel room lights turned on. It was room 312. I had a perfect angle from camera 16, and I knew for a fact that the entire hotel had been locked down for weeks. No one was supposed to be inside. I watched the light glow, warm against the otherwise dark floor. I called it in. Everyone accounted for. So I grabbed the master key and went to check it myself. The room was freezing. My breath fogged in the air as I stepped in. One of the bedside lamps was on. The bed was unmade, pillows tossed across the floor. The toilet paper had been completely unraveled into a heap in the bathroom. The curtains had been pulled halfway down. It looked like someone had been thrashing around in there. I logged it, turned off the light, and left. Told myself maybe the maintenance crew had left something half done before the shutdown. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had just been there. Like I'd walked in a few seconds too late. It kept happening after that. Different rooms, lights flickering on, furniture moved. Once a chair was found turned toward the window, facing out, though we never left them that way. Another time, the tub in room 207 was full of water. No one had a key but security. There were sounds too. At first it was faint music, not from the overhead system that had been turned off since March, but something low and far away, like an old radio playing inside the walls. One night around 2 a.m., I heard what I swear was a slot machine payout jingle echoing faintly through the empty casino floor. I switched the feeds trying to locate it, but all the screens showed still, silent darkness. Then came the motion alerts. Cameras that had never once tripped since the closure started began lighting up the board. Motion detected in the pool area. Motion detected in the buffet. Motion detected in the hotel hallway. Again and again. But each time I checked, there was nothing. Just the faint distortion, like something half there, walking past. The strangest night came in May. The place had been closed almost 2 months by then. I was alone in the office, sipping stale coffee, when the screen for the east hallway flickered again. This time the shape wasn't just distortion. It had density, a faint shimmer like someone invisible moving under a thin layer of water. It drifted toward the camera, slowed beneath it, and for a second I thought I saw something darker in the shimmer, a hollow spot where a face might be. Every screen in front of me blinked once. All the feeds went black for about 3 seconds. When they came back on, half the cameras showed static. The others showed angles they weren't even set to, like someone had manually moved them. One was pointing straight down at the floor, another directly into a wall. Then I realized something was wrong in the room with me. The dispatch phone, an old beige rotary-style thing, started clicking. Not ringing, clicking, as if the line was being tapped rhythmically. 1, 2, pause. 3, pause. 1. The lights in the office dimmed. I could hear the ventilation system stop. The air went still, heavy. For about half a minute, I didn't move. Just sat there staring at the monitors. The clicking stopped. The phone gave a single, sharp ring. I didn't answer it. The second I stood up, the ring cut off mid-tone, like someone had pulled the line. When the air system kicked back on, all the monitors returned to normal. I radioed the supervisor to see if anyone was having electrical issues. He said no, everything was fine. I didn't tell him what I'd seen. Later that week, I found wet footprints in the hallway outside the surveillance office. They were bare feet, small, leading from the elevator toward the stairwell. And there was no one on the floor with me that night. The prints ended halfway down the stairs. No smudges, no drips, nothing past the third step. By June, I'd stopped looking too closely at the screens. I did my job, logged the lights, checked the reports, kept the radio active. But I never stared long. The more you watched, the more it seemed to notice you back. The casino reopened later that year, and things went mostly back to normal. The lights stopped flickering. The cameras stayed steady. Guests returned, and the noise filled every corner again. I moved shifts not long after. Nights were too quiet for me. Sometimes, though, when I pass by the old dispatch office, I glance at the monitors through the window. Every once in a while, one of them still shows that same fourth-floor hallway. And sometimes, only when no one else is looking, I catch that same shimmer again. It moves slow, like it's underwater, always from the far end toward the camera, always stopping right before it reaches the lens. The screen will flicker once, just once, and then it's gone. Maybe it's a glitch. Maybe the old system just has bad wiring. That's what I tell myself anyway. But there's a part of me, the part that remembers that dead frozen air in room 312 and those small wet footprints on the stairs. That isn't so sure. I still dream sometimes about the static from that night. In the dream, all the monitors are black except one, the fourth-floor hallway, and the invisible shape is standing right under the camera, facing straight up. I can't see its face, but I can feel that it knows I'm there. And when I wake up for a few seconds, I always think I hear that faint clicking sound coming from the phone again. 1, 2, pause. 3, pause. 1. Story number 4. I'd been a police officer for over 10 years before I finally decided to take a proper vacation. No calls, no night shifts, no emergencies. Just quiet. I booked a week at a ski resort tucked somewhere in a small town. The pictures online showed bright slopes, bonfires, and laughing families in colorful jackets. When I arrived, it was nothing like that. The resort was big but oddly silent. Even the wind sounded muffled, like the snow swallowed all sound. There were maybe 3 other guests, all of them quiet and distant, eating their meals separately. I thought maybe I'd caught it in between bookings, but the receptionist mentioned it was peak season. That didn't make sense. The first 2 days were uneventful. I mostly sat by the window, watched the heavy snow pile up, and tried to forget about work. My room smelled faintly of pine wood and something metallic, maybe old heating pipes. On the 3rd night, boredom hit hard. I remembered the receptionist mentioning a hot spring, about a 20-minute walk from the resort. The road was dirt, cutting through a forest that looked endless. No lights, no other travelers, just dark trees on both sides leaning inward as if whispering secrets. I almost turned back, but the thought of warm water in this freezing cold pushed me forward. After maybe 10 minutes, I started noticing things that didn't add up. My footprints in the snow behind me, there were too many. I could clearly see the pattern of my boots, but next to them, faint and smaller prints followed in perfect sync. Not animal tracks, not another person's. Just wrong. I turned around, scanned the empty path, and told myself it was some snowdrift pattern. Then I smelled something faint. Smoke. Not wood smoke, though. It was sharper, chemical, almost like burning plastic. That's when I saw the end of the road. No hot spring. Instead, there stood a small cottage, crumpled like it had been buried in snow years ago and only recently dug up. The roof was bent inward, and smoke trickled lazily from a crooked chimney. The windows were frosted, but faint light flickered inside. I hesitated, then pushed the door open. It creaked like it hadn't moved in years. The air inside was warmer than outside, and thick with the scent of burnt sugar. The place was small, just one main room with a rusted stove, a narrow bed, and walls lined with cracked wooden shelves. There was no one. I should have left, but something about the warmth felt unnatural, like the heat wasn't coming from the stove, but the air itself. Then the chimney started to hum. A low vibration rolled through the floorboards. Before I could react, thick red smoke began seeping from the chimney hole, curling down into the room instead of rising up. It filled the air like mist underwater, slow, heavy, and glowing faintly. My throat burned when I breathed it in. I stumbled back, clutching my face. The air crackled. For a split second, it looked like someone was sitting on the bed. I blinked and it was empty again. The humming stopped abruptly. The red smoke was gone, like it had never been there. Everything smelled like damp earth. I forced myself to step outside. The snow had changed. It wasn't white anymore. It looked dusted with gray ash. On the way back, I noticed something else. My footprints this time were only one set. The others were gone. I remember thinking maybe I'd imagined them earlier, but as I passed a tree near the path, I saw something hanging from one of its branches. A piece of fabric, old, faded, and stiff from the cold. It was the same color as my jacket. I reached up to touch it and realized it wasn't cloth. It was skin. That's when the lights of the resort appeared in the distance, and I ran the rest of the way. Inside my room, I couldn't get warm again. My reflection in the bathroom mirror looked off. My skin had a reddish hue under the eyes, and my breath fogged unnaturally thick, like the red smoke had settled in my lungs. I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the snowstorm intensify. At around 3 a.m., the power flickered and went out completely. I thought I saw movement outside, something standing where the forest met the resort boundary. It looked like someone in winter clothes, head tilted slightly upward. I tried to focus, but every time I blinked, it seemed closer. I closed the curtains and stayed still until dawn. In the morning, I went to the reception. The woman there didn't seem surprised when I asked about the hot spring. She said the road had been closed for years after a landslide took out the area. I told her I'd seen a cottage there, still standing. She looked confused. She said no one had lived beyond that path for decades. There had been a caretaker's hut once, but it burned down in 1997. Gas explosion, apparently. The description she gave of the caretaker made my stomach twist. Small-framed, always wore a red scarf, lived alone. No body was ever found after the fire, only the chimney still standing. That evening I packed early. I didn't want another night there. But before I left, I looked back at the forest. The sky had cleared, revealing pale sunlight. But there was smoke, thin and red, rising faintly from somewhere behind the trees. I could have dismissed it as reflection, or maybe dust-catching light. I didn't go to check. On the way home, I kept trying to rationalize everything. The extra footprints, probably uneven snow compression, the skin-like thing, maybe animal hide hardened by frost, the red smoke, could have been some weird chemical reaction from buried gas lines or old embers. But the strange thing is, my clothes still carry that faint burnt sugar smell. It doesn't wash off. My throat sometimes feels raw, and on cold nights when I exhale, the fog that leaves my mouth looks darker than it should, almost red-tinted under the light. I haven't told anyone at the station about it. I don't want the jokes, but sometimes when I lie awake at night, I think I hear that same low hum again, the one from the chimney. It starts faint, like air pressure shifting, then builds until the room feels like it's vibrating. It stops the moment I move. I tell myself it's tinnitus, or maybe just the memory playing tricks. But last week I noticed something new. My bathroom mirror has started fogging up in a strange way. It doesn't mist evenly anymore. Every time I shower, it fogs from the bottom up, like smoke rising backward. And 2 nights ago, when I wiped it clear, for just a second, I saw the faint outline of a small cottage reflected behind me. Snow, a crooked chimney, and the faintest hint of red drifting from it. I blinked and it was gone. Still, the smell lingers. And sometimes when the night is completely silent, I think I can taste that burnt sweetness again. Like the air in that room hadn't really let me go. I keep wondering if I ever really left that forest. Story number 5. I used to work as a night dispatch officer in a mid-sized town just off the state highway. Most nights were routine: vehicle breakdowns, domestic disputes, sometimes wildlife complaints. But one night, around 12:17 a.m., I got a call from an unknown number. It was faint, filled with static, but the voice on the other end sounded like a small child. Not crying, not panicked, just whispering. I could only make out a few words. "Help, please, he's gone." Then the line went dead. Normally, we don't trace calls from unregistered numbers, but something about that voice, it felt real. I did a reverse lookup through our internal system. It pinged an address on the edge of an old, long-abandoned neighborhood that had been mostly demolished after a mass burglary gone wrong 10 years ago. Only a few skeletal houses remained, mostly boarded up. I shouldn't have gone alone, but I did. The road leading there was cracked, grass growing through the tar. No streetlights, no houses with power, no sound except for my boots crunching over gravel. At the end of the street stood the last house, a two-story wooden structure. The windows were broken, the roof caved slightly inward. No light, no sign of habitation. Just that uneasy silence that makes your ears ring. I radioed in my location, stepped out of the car, and started toward the porch. The boards creaked under me, the kind of sound that feels deliberate, like the house is warning you not to come closer. I checked the door. It wasn't locked. The hinges groaned when I pushed it open. Inside, the air was stale and cold. My flashlight beam caught floating dust, hanging like smoke. I called out, asked if anyone was there. Nothing. Just the faint hum of insects outside. The living room was empty except for a broken chair and an old TV with its screen shattered. There were signs that someone had been there. A half-burned candle on the floor, a child's sneaker near the stairs. I remember feeling my pulse quicken when I noticed something odd. Near the far wall, the wallpaper was peeled in a pattern, like someone had clawed at it in long, vertical streaks. The wood underneath had faint indentations, evenly spaced like small fingernail marks. I moved upstairs, but every step made the whole house shift slightly under my weight. The second floor was worse. More dust, debris, and a faint rhythmic tapping sound coming from one of the rooms. It was slow, irregular, like something light hitting wood. When I entered, it stopped. The room was bare except for a small wooden desk and a window facing the backyard. The tapping had come from the window latch. It was slightly loose, swinging back and forth even though the air was completely still. I walked to the window and looked out. The backyard was overgrown, wild grass reaching knee-high. And there at the center was a rusted swing set. Two swings. One was still, but the other was moving. Not violently, but steady, rhythmic, back and forth. And then I heard it. Laughter. Faint. Childlike. It didn't echo. Didn't fade. It was as if it was right there, beside my ear but not in the air, like a sound that came from inside your head. I froze. There was no wind. The grass wasn't moving. Nothing else around that swing was disturbed. I watched it for maybe 20 seconds before I forced myself to head downstairs. My mind kept trying to rationalize it. Maybe an animal brushed past, or the wind was funneled through some gap. But I knew the air was dead still. When I stepped outside, the laughter stopped. The swing had slowed but hadn't stopped completely. The chains made faint groans as they rubbed against the rusted hooks. I walked closer, flashlight cutting through the tall grass. There were footprints beneath the swing, small ones, barefoot, fresh, pressed into the dirt. They led behind the swing set and stopped at a circular patch of ground where the grass didn't grow at all. It was perfectly even, like someone had placed something heavy there for a long time. And then I heard a soft thump behind me. I turned, but nothing was there. The swing was still again. I decided to check the house one last time before calling it in. When I re-entered, the temperature felt different, warmer somehow, even though the air outside was cool. The candle I'd seen earlier was no longer half burned. It was melted into a small puddle of wax. I remember staring at it, confused, because I hadn't seen any flame. I hadn't smelled anything burning. The wall where the wallpaper had been peeled was different now. The claw marks were gone. In their place were faint chalk lines, stick figures, drawn in messy circles. Each had a pair of wings, and one had no head. That was when I noticed the ticking sound again. Not the latch this time. It was faster, sharper, like a small metronome. It was coming from the walls. Every few seconds, a faint metallic click, moving along the panels, as if something tiny was crawling just inside the wood, tapping as it went. I pressed my ear against it. The sound stopped. Then something tapped back. 3 short knocks, perfectly spaced. I stumbled back and turned toward the stairs, but my boot hit something, the child's sneaker. Only now it was paired, both shoes neatly side by side. I left then, didn't even shut the door. As I reached my car, I took one last look at the house. The swing was still now, completely motionless. But just as I opened my car door, I noticed movement on the second floor window. Something very slight. Not a figure or a shadow, just distortion. Like the glass itself had rippled for a moment, as if something behind it had exhaled. I drove straight back to the station and filed an incident report. I even logged the coordinates and call record. The next morning I checked the system for the number. It didn't exist. The record of that incoming call was gone, like it was never made. I went back a few days later with another officer. The house was still there, but the swing set had collapsed. The backyard was just empty ground. No footprints, no patch, nothing. But every now and then, during late-night dispatch duty, I still get calls that never show up on record. Static-filled, faint voices. Sometimes I think I hear that same whisper again. The one from that night, soft and patient, always saying the same thing. Help, please. He's gone. And every time I trace the signal, it always leads back to that same spot, the last house. And every time I go there, even now, years later, there's always something new in the dirt behind the swing. A mark, a small shoe print. And once, I swear, the ground there was moving, like something underneath it was breathing. Story number 6. My brother-in-law, Daniel, has been in the police force for nearly 15 years. He's not the kind of man who gets spooked easily. He's seen accident scenes, violent crimes, and the aftermath of things most people can't even imagine. So when he once told me about a wellness check that still gives him nightmares, I paid attention. It was about 3 years ago. He was sent to a small, single-story house on the outskirts of Michigan. The call came from a neighbor who hadn't seen the resident, a man in his 60s suffering from terminal cancer, for several days. The place was quiet, isolated, and surrounded by tall hedges that blocked the view from the road. Daniel said it was a standard check. Most of the time, these end the same way, a natural death, maybe days old. But this one, he said, didn't follow any pattern he'd ever known. He parked his patrol car in the narrow driveway, walked up to the front door, and knocked. No response. He called out, waited, and then tried the handle. It turned. Inside, everything was unnervingly clean. Not just tidy, but sterile. There was no clutter, no personal items, not even a photo frame or newspaper. Just white walls, pale curtains, and furniture that looked barely used. He checked the living room first. Nothing. Then the kitchen. Spotless, with a single cup turned upside down on the counter. He said the air felt still, like a vacuum. No hum of a refrigerator, no faint sound from outside, not even the ticking of a clock. It was like the house was holding its breath. He moved down the hallway, checking the bedroom and bathroom. The bed was made with crisp hospital corners, the nightstand empty. No signs of illness, no medication bottles, no oxygen tank, nothing to suggest anyone had lived there recently. He thought maybe the man had been taken to the hospital without notifying anyone. Then he saw a door at the end of the hall. It was slightly ajar, and behind it, a flight of stairs led downward. The light switch didn't work, so he used his flashlight and began descending. The basement was unexpectedly large, unfinished, with bare concrete walls and a smooth polished floor. It was cold down there, colder than it should have been. The beam from his flashlight cut through the dark, revealing something strange. Faint lines on the floor, etched into the cement. Not random scratches, but geometric patterns. Circles within circles, overlapping squares, precise enough to look deliberate. There was a folding chair placed exactly in the center. He approached it, noticing that the concrete beneath the chair was darker. like it had been recently scrubbed. On the wall facing the chair, he found a calendar. Every date was marked with a small red dot except for the current week, which was blank. He said he couldn't explain it, but something about that missing row of dots made his stomach turn. Then as he scanned the rest of the room, he realized there were multiple small holes in the walls, not large enough for ventilation, but evenly spaced, like someone had drilled into the concrete with precision. He leaned close to one and saw that the inside wasn't hollow. It was filled with what looked like packed white salt. Every single hole, hundreds of them, was filled that way. He took a few photos on his phone to document the scene and was about to leave when he heard something subtle. Not a noise exactly, but a faint vibration in the floor. Like a pulse, too low to be sound but strong enough to be felt. It wasn't coming from any machine or power source. The entire house had no electricity. He stood still for a minute, trying to trace the rhythm. It was irregular. Two faint thuds, then a pause, then one longer, deeper tremor. He described it as feeling like the floor had a heartbeat. He told himself it was probably underground plumbing or maybe a generator buried nearby. But when he crouched down and pressed his hand to the ground, the pulse stopped instantly. And that silence, that sudden absence, was worse than the vibration itself. He decided to get out and call it in. But before leaving, he turned once more toward the wall with the holes. One of them was now empty. The salt that had filled it was scattered in a thin line along the floor, as if something had pushed its way out from inside. He stood there staring at it, trying to rationalize. Maybe the salt settled and spilled due to moisture. Maybe he'd accidentally brushed against it. But the line was too neat, too deliberate. He backed up the stairs slowly. Halfway up, his flashlight flickered once. Not out, just dimmed like something was draining it. He kept climbing, the air growing warmer as he reached the ground floor. When he stepped into the hallway again, he noticed something that hadn't been there before. The cup on the kitchen counter was no longer upside down. It was upright, filled with clear water, and condensation had formed on its sides, as if it had just been poured. He left immediately, reported the house, logged the visit, and sent the file to be checked. The official record says the resident had passed away at a hospice 2 weeks before that night. The house had been empty since. The neighbor who'd called in the wellness check had apparently seen lights in the windows on 3 consecutive nights and assumed the man had come back home. Daniel went back the next day. The basement was empty. The chair, the calendar, the patterns, all gone. The floor had been freshly painted over in a thick coat of gray, and there were no holes left in the walls. He asked the neighbor if anyone had come by that morning. The man said no one had entered or exited. He was sure of it. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He said every time he closed his eyes, he kept thinking about the missing salt hole, the way it looked like something had been contained in that basement. He wondered if the dying man had been trying to trap something, or maybe himself. The weirdest part came a few days later. When he tried to look through the photos he'd taken, half of them wouldn't open. The ones that did were distorted. It's been 3 years now, and that house was sold to new owners. They renovated everything, filled the yard with flower beds, painted it cheerful colors. But every now and then, Daniel gets a new call to that same address. Not for emergencies, just noise complaints or reports of faint knocking sounds. He always transfers the call to someone else. When I asked him why, he said it's not fear exactly. It's more like respect, because whatever was down there, if it really was nothing, then it's the kind of nothing that doesn't stay gone. And sometimes, when I think about it too much, I can almost feel that same subtle tremor under my feet, like something far below, remembering it was once disturbed.